Dr. George Harding Jr. now found himself struggling with his conscience. There was no doubt in his mind that Billy was fused, or close to fusion now, and probably could be fused enough to stand trial. That wasn't the problem. As Dr. George lay awake nights in late August, going over the material for the report to Judge Flowers, he wondered if it was morally right to use the diagnosis of multiple personality as a defense against these major crimes. He was deeply concerned with the issue of criminal responsibility. It troubled him that his words might be misused, bringing discredit to the multiple personality diagnosis, to other patients who had this syndrome, to the profession, and to psychiatric testimony. If Judge Flowers accepted his judgment that the dissociative disorder classified as far as a neurosis was reason to find the patient not guilty by reason of insanity, he knew it would set legal precedent in Ohio, and perhaps in the country. Dr. George believed Billy Milligan had not had control over his actions on those 3 fateful days last October. It was his job to learn more and push into new areas. It was his responsibility to understand this case, to understand Billy in a way that would be useful to society in dealing with similar problems. He again phoned other professionals for advice and guidance, confirmed with his staff, and then, on September 12, 1978, he sat down and wrote his 9-page report to Judge Flowers, in which he described Billy Milligan's medical, social, and psychiatric history. The patient reports, he wrote, that the mother and children were subject to physical abuse and that he suffered sadistic and sexual abuse, including anal intercourse from Mr. Milligan. According to the patient, this occurred when he was 8 or 9 over the course of a year, generally on a farm where he would be alone with the stepfather. He indicates that he was afraid that the stepfather would kill him insomuch as he threatened to bury him in the barn and tell the mother that he had run away. In analyzing the psychodynamics of the case, Harding pointed out that Milligan's natural father's suicide had deprived him of a father's involvement and attention, and left him with a feeling of irrational power and overwhelming guilt leading to anxiety, conflict, and increased fantasy formulation. He was thus vulnerable to exploitation by the stepfather Chalmer Milligan, who preyed upon his needs for closeness and caring to satisfy his own frustrations through sexual and sadistic exploitation. Since young Milligan identified with his mother, when she was beaten by her husband, it caused young Milligan to experience her terror and pain. It also led to a kind of separation anxiety, which left him in an unstable fantasy world with all the unpredictable and unintelligible characteristics of a dream. This, along with the stepfather's put-downs, sadistic abuses, and sexual exploitation, led to recurrent dissociations. Dr. George Harding concluded, "It is now my opinion that the patient is competent to stand trial, having accomplished a fusion of his multiple personalities. It is also my opinion that the patient is mentally ill, and that as a result of his mental illness, he was not responsible for his criminal conduct at the time the criminal conduct did occur in the last half of October 1977. On September 19th, Judy Stevenson filed a motion to amend the defendant's plea to not guilty, and not guilty by reason of insanity. Up to this point in Milligan's case, the multiple personality diagnosis had not been made public. It was known only to those treating him, the prosecutors, and the judge. The public defenders continued to insist that the diagnosis be kept secret, since it would be difficult to treat him and then try his case if it exploded into a media event. Bernievich agreed, feeling it was well within his ethics as prosecutor not to reveal what was going on with the suspect, since there had been no testimony in court about it. But on the morning of September 27th, the Columbus Citizen Journal broke the story with banner headlines: "Personalities fused for court trial. 10 people exist in rape suspect." When the word got out at Harding Hospital about the morning paper, the staff encouraged Billy to tell the other patients about it before they learned of it from outside sources. He told the mini-group that he had been charged with his crimes, but he wasn't sure he had done them, since he was diffused at the time. The evening news on television carried the story, and Billy went to his room in tears. A few days later, Billy did a painting of a beautiful young woman with a tortured gaze, and Nurse Nan Graves reported his statement that it was Adelana. Gary Schweikart visited Milligan on October 3rd, driving in his station wagon so that he could take some of Billy's paintings back with him. Judy Stevenson was on vacation with her husband in Italy. He explained and wouldn't be at the competency hearing, but she'd be back in time for the trial. They walked and talked together as Gary tried to prepare Billy for the transfer to the Franklin County Jail to await his competency hearing, and for the possibility that they might lose the case. Dr. George felt certain Billy was fused. He could tell by the lack of observable dissociation episodes, and also by the way Billy seemed to have taken on the characteristics of the separate personalities. At first he'd see part of one and part of another, but by degrees there had been a blending, a homogenization. The staff had seen it too. All the aspects of the different personalities were now seen in one, Billy Milligan. Dr. George said his patient was ready. On October 4th, 2 days before Billy was to return to the Franklin County Jail, Harry Franken of the Citizen Journal broke a second major story about Milligan. He had gotten a copy of the Harding report from an unnamed source, and he came to Gary and Judy for comment, telling them he was going to run the story. Gary and Judy informed Judge Flowers, who decided the story should be released to the Columbus Dispatch as well. The public defenders agreed to comment on the report, since it had been leaked already. They allowed photographers to take pictures of the paintings Gary had brought back from the hospital. Moses about to break the tablet containing the 10 Commandments, a Jewish musician playing a horn, a landscape, and the portrait of Adelana. The newspaper stories upset Billy, and he was depressed during his final session with Dr. Cocan. He was afraid of what other prisoners might do to him now that the word was out that he had a lesbian personality. He told her, "If they find me guilty and send me back to Lebanon, I know I'll have to die. Then Chalmer will have won. Well, what do? I have all this hate bottled up inside me. I can't handle it." Although she rarely gave advice or instructions, preferring the non-directive method of allowing the patient to lead the way, she knew there was no time for such therapy. "You could put hate to positive use," she suggested. "You suffered from child abuse. You could defeat those horrible memories and the man you say inflicted them by dedicating your life to the fight against child abuse. Alive, you can work for a cause and win. If you die, then the man who abused you wins and you lose." Later that day, talking to Donna Agar in his room, Billy reached under his bed and pulled out the razor blade Tommy had taped to the sled nearly 7 months earlier. "Here," he said, handing it to her. "I don't need this anymore. I want to leave." There were tears in her eyes as she hugged him. He told Rosalie, "I don't want to go to minigroup. I've got to prepare myself to be alone. I've got to harden myself. No goodbyes." But the minigroup made farewell cards for him, and when Rosalie brought them to him, he let himself cry. "For the first time in my life," he said, "I think I'm having a normal human reaction. I've got what I used to hear referred to as mixed emotions. I've never been able to have them before." Friday, October 6th, the day he was to be taken away, was Rosalie's day off, but she came down to the hospital to be with him. She knew she would face raised eyebrows and sarcastic comments from some of the Wakefield staff, but she didn't care. She walked into the rec room and saw him, dressed in his blue 3-piece suit, pacing, waiting, apparently calm and in control. She and Donna Agar walked with him to the administration building, where a sheriff's deputy in dark glasses waited at the front desk. When the deputy whipped out the handcuffs, Rosalie stepped in front of Billy and demanded to know if it was really necessary to handcuff him like an animal. "Yes, ma'am," the deputy said. It is the law. Well, for God's sake, Donna shouted. When he was brought over here, he was escorted by 2 females. And now you're going to be a big bad cop and handcuff him? That's the way it has to be, ma'am. I'm sorry. Billy held out his wrists, and when the cuffs snapped into place, Rosalie saw him wince. He climbed into the paddy wagon, and they walked beside it as it slowly moved along the curving road toward the stone bridge. They waved goodbye, went back to the unit, and had a long, hard cry.